Good evening, everybody, and welcome all the new listeners tuning in to another episode of Beyond the Classroom. In the third episode of this program, the topic and questions will pertain to the impact of reduced literature engagement on ESL learning in Puerto Rican preteens. All audiences are welcome to listen and learn more about the struggles of teaching English as a second language in Puerto Rico. Other topics will relate to how the decline of consumption of literature has affected ESL, the possible ways how our schools could change curriculums to benefit students, and lastly, how apprehension towards the United States has impacted our students' language acquisition. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to the third episode of the program. This podcast provides future educators an opportunity to interview current educators with the aim of enriching those who aspire to be teachers by sharing experiences and imparting knowledge. I'm your host, Kamila Dominguez, and I'm joined by my partner, Nicole Díaz,
Hello, everyone.
and Adriana Serrano, who's in charge of moderating the chat, questions, comments, and any other important highlights, and the final summary of what we've discussed tonight. We're all currently students at the University of Puerto Rico at Cayey, and tonight we will be interviewing Yoseph Villafañe, a former graduate of the University of Puerto Rico at Cayey, and now a distinguished professional as an educator of the English language. Joseph Villafañe. Hello, Joseph.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Hi,
Thanks, everybody.
welcome. Well, Joseph Villafañe is a proud English teacher from the enchanted island of Puerto Rico. Growing up in a valley, he naturally enjoys the mountains and visiting Puerto Rico's natural parks. In 2015, he graduated from the University of Puerto Rico at Cayey with a Bachelor of Arts in English Education. In 2020, Villafañe completed his postgraduate studies at Southern New Hampshire University and earned a Master of Arts in English. He is also currently a doctoral student of English at UPR Rio Piedras. After serving in the United States Army, he returned to Puerto Rico to do what he loves the most, that is, teaching and saving the world one student at a time. And lastly, we'll be discussing the topic of the impact of reduced engagement on ESL learning in Puerto Rican preteens. How are you doing tonight, Joseph?
I'm doing great. Just glad to be here again. This is my second time in the show. So yeah, I'm super excited.
Super excited to have you and to hear what you have to say.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now moving on to the Q&A, that's in charge of my partner, Nicole.
Hey, good night, everybody. Okay, moving on to the first question. Do you believe that reading and the acquisition of English as a second language go hand in hand?
Well, I mean, definitely, reading has an impact on your lexicon, right? Your vocabulary. You need to acquire as much language as possible, and the only way to do this is through reading, right? You experience a different variety of varieties of sentence construction, hence syntax, right? Through reading, and that's the way that you can perfectly learn the language. Even writing as well, right? We have authors like Esmeralda Santiago who say that they learn how to write by reading, right? Reading other authors, reading other genres, and so on. So reading can provide you with a dialogue or basically like a model of how you can act in a certain task or a certain situation. So let's say that you have to fill up your tank for your car, right? And you're in a different country and you don't speak the native language, right? English would be the language in question. And you've never been to a gas station outside of Puerto Rico. So what do you do? Well, this is where books come into play, right? Because just like George R. R. Martin says, a reader lives a thousand lives. He who never reads only lives once, right? This is where you get the scene from the book that you read, and you can engage in the same dialogue that was transpiring in the book. Because if you had a character in so and so book that was fulfilling that task of filling up your gas tank in your car, at a gas station, you can use that dialogue that you had in the book and transfer it into the real life. It happens with movies all the time. Like sometimes I see my students imitating dialogues from shows and movies that they watched. So the same thing transpires in books, right? In literature and reading. And I believe that it's even better than the shows and the movies because you can visually see the words and how they're organized, right? And that will help you overcome certain situations, certain tasks. So definitely, the acquisition of another language is highly important when seen through the lens of reading.
That example was really good, the one of the gas station. I feel like, that sort of imitation, like you said, is something that you could see a
Yes.
lot when it comes to someone learning a different language.
Yeah, and even something as banal as and something as easy as going to a restaurant and ordering food. How
Mhm.
many times have we seen or read, right, scenes in these books that portray a character ordering food, and even the conversation would flow similarly to how the character is doing it in the book. So you would imitate the dialogue in real life, and that's how you get out of these awkward situations where you don't know what to do, and you go back to your favorite character and you imitate them, which is kind of cool if you think about it.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is very interesting. All right, question 2. How do you see in your classroom the decline of literature consumption in Puerto Rico's preteens?
Oh, um, that's a very, very wide question. But to narrow it down, I would say that it happens at least in our school, right? I teach at Rafael Ponflores Language Specialized School, right, where we teach the class fully in English. Some of the materials that are given in science and math are also in English, right? We have a culture of multilingualism because we also teach Portuguese, French, Italian in our school. So I think that those students that arrive for the first time in our school, right, the new students, as I like to call them, they go through the process of learning to love, right, literature. But I see it transpiring in that generation that comes from outside of the school, right, that hasn't been through the experience of what is a book, why are we reading, what's the importance of literature in our lives. And there's this culture of immediacy, we want things on demand, if it makes sense. um, Even nowadays there's apps for everything. Like technology has basically collapsed around us and encompasses everything that we do. You can make coffee just by pushing a button in the morning. Like the process of grinding the coffee has been lost. Everything is done through technology. Like I can arrive at my house and the garage door will open up by itself. The AC will turn on automatically because it's a certain time. So everything is done immediately. So I think that today's generation goes straight into that, right? Even videos and posts on social media like Instagram, they're not longer than what, 7 minutes, 5 minutes. So that translates into English and literature consumption as well, because reading takes time, right? It's a habit. You have to build that habit. And it starts from an early age, right? You have to start reading something simple in kindergarten. Hopefully, before you arrive to school, your parents have read you stuff, have shown you picture books and whatnot. And so, if you slowly build up that habit, you can get later on to books like Beowulf, like the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. Really complex uh, books that demand a higher level of understanding in a society, right? So I see the literature consumption being deflated, if it makes sense, because of that sense of immediacy. You can pay an app, and I can't remember the name of the app, but you can pay an app and a subscription so that the app gives you the highlights of a book that is 300 pages long. And it will give you like a summarized, condensed version of it, right? And you can read that book and all of its importance in 10 minutes. But what happens when you read a book in 10 minutes, just with the highlights and the main ideas? You lose all the absorption of the lexicon, the vocabulary, right? You lose the sense of what did I get from the book, rather than the app providing what the app thinks the book is about. So yeah, reading is a habit. You have to build it up. It's like I compare it to going to the gym. What happens the first day you get to the gym and you try to lift weights? You start from the basics, right? I mean, I for sure cannot go to the gym right now and try to lift like 200 pounds of weight
350.
and just say, oh, yeah, I'm He-Man, I'm Hulk. I will do this, no questions asked. No, because it takes time. You have to build a habit. You have to build the experience. As you gain that experience, your reading comprehension gets better. Hence, going back to the gym example, you build muscle, right? And reading is a muscle as well. So once you develop that healthy habit of reading, right, and you create it a part of your life, you will be able to understand more complex readings like Beowulf and the Canterbury Tales and so on.
I agree. It takes baby steps to get into reading like these huge pieces of literature, and it could be very difficult, especially since English isn't really, their second language. Well, their English is their second
Definitely.
language. Okay.
Definitely. And there's books today, I'm sorry, like I started off reading a book to my daughter. My daughter's 4 years old, and by now she can read both in Spanish and English, even before getting to pre-K. And I started off with easy books. Like there's this amazing book, I forgot the name, El Jibarito de la Cajita, something like that. I think it's the title. And that book provides pictures, right? And it has the same dialogue both in English and in Spanish as well. So she can differentiate between the two languages. And that creates a headspace, if you may, for these two languages to coexist in one area of her brain, if you may.
It reminds me of like when I was younger and watching like episodes of like Dora the Explorer where they repeat something in Spanish and then in English.
Yeah.
It just goes on and on and on.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely. Okay, moving on to the third question. Do you think that the literature from schools' curriculums affect the decline in preteens' interest in reading? And which of these do your students struggle with the most?
Um, I believe it can go both ways. There is a decline for sure, but I don't want to portray, like I said in the previous episode that I was here, I don't want to portray myself as a superhero teacher that changes the world and whatnot. But once the students get through ninth grade with me, they got accustomed to the culture of high school and so on. They change their mentality. But for sure, there's a decline, and I would say that yes, it has to do with the curriculum, the literature that the curriculum provides, because it oftentimes it goes for the classics, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
like Hamlet, and I'm not saying anything bad about Shakespeare. Like Shakespeare is the man, but
Frankenstein or anything like that.
no, yeah, Bichet,
Students hate
Shelley,
that.
yes,
Students hate it.
I know. But why do they hate them? And it's because it portrays a reality that they are not living. And the classics are the classics, yes. I myself, I teach Beowulf in 11th grade. I'm not saying do not teach the classics, but you first have to teach them to love to read, right? And how do you do that? By finding books that they can correlate with. Books that have characters that are young adults, right?
Mhm.
Why do they want to read about, I don't know, an old person trying to save the world and a world that they cannot relate to because it's in the, I don't know, previous century and so on. And so they have to relate to the text that they're reading. Once they learn how to love, right, how to love the reading process and so on, then yes, we can move on to more difficult tasks, like I said, Beowulf, Canterbury Tales, and so on.
We actually have a question from the audience, and it is literature for school becoming more controversial or more sensitive, in your opinion?
Um, I have seen, at least not in Puerto Rico, but I have seen a plethora of books being banned, especially in the States. I think that people are becoming more sensitive to certain topics, right? Um, so yes, but not in Puerto Rico at least. I think that the curriculum has expanded, especially since I want to say it was last year. Last year there was a publishing of the new curriculum maps for the English program. I don't know the other subjects, but at least in the English program there was a new publication of units for the curricular maps. So I would say it's more inclusive, and the curricular maps are more engaging to the present situation of the world and of the island as well.
Okay, I'm going to pass on the questions to my partner, Kamila.
Well, question number 4. Do you think that the apprehension towards wanting to learn English as a second language stems from the disdain Puerto Ricans have against the United States? And if so, what would you recommend future teachers to do to help students fight that stigma?
There's
So
always the
controversial.
political question.
But it's so important because there's so much history, and that's where education starts, is with
I
English
know.
teachers. So,
But going back to the previous episode I was in, there was a similar question to this, and something that caught my attention was that my perspective was different from Yosef's perspective, right? And I explained in the previous episode that back in ye olden days, we used to call English el difícil. I don't know if you've heard that
yes,
term,
yes, I
right?
definitely.
Exactly. So that's a kind of a cultural thing. But the students that were interviewing me, that they thought that it was mostly tied to the political situation, right? Or the not the political situation, more like the cultural aspect of how Puerto Rico functions. And it's funny because I was talking with my professor the other day, actually yesterday, about this, and he brought up the concept of language ideology. So language ideology stems from the concept of talking about talking, if it makes sense. I know it's a weird concept, but bear with me. So things like, let's say that you're walking around the streets, right? And you hear somebody talk, and the way that they talk made you made you think that they're undereducated, right? Just because of the way they talk.
Mm.
That is language ideology. It's what the how the way we talk or how we represent ourselves or what we believe language is or what it represents permeates or depicts who we are, right? And that goes back to your question. Do we think that English is a colonial language, or do we believe that talking English makes us less Puerto Ricans than others that do not? Because at a certain point in my life, and I'm pretty sure that if it hasn't happened so far to you, it will happen eventually, that there will be a, I don't know, a segregation of group of people that will say, ah, this guy or this girl speaks English, el un gringo, right? Or they will use
Definitely.
these terms, right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it has happened.
I think it's inevitable because of that culture. Now I'm seeing that's more acceptable. I'm hearing more people in the street speak English, which is nothing to be ashamed of.
Yes,
But sadly, for a lot of
exactly.
years, this was a reality. And if you just spoke with a friend, in English, you would get odd stares,
Yes.
or if you
Or
were
maybe
code
even to the
switching,
point.
maybe even code
Exactly.
switching, that's looked down upon because of what you said,
Yes.
language ideology. It's either because people are probably thinking you're just bragging that you know English, or you're butchering either Spanish or English because you're code switching. But there's a
Yes.
lot of
Yes.
factors of why one code switches. So that's
Definitely.
the thing.
And it happens in English as well,
Mm.
right? Because I learned English in Texas, right? So I have family in Texas, and whenever I would not use the Texas accent with them, and I would use more of a standardized English, whatever that means, right? They would say, this guy's trying to sound fancy, or he's trying to talk like a teacher in front of us. So it happens in other countries as well.
Yeah.
But going back to the question, it is up to us Puerto Ricans, and especially English teachers in Puerto Rico, to break that cycle, right? We need to teach English and the concept of the Caribbean. What is the Caribbean? It's a meta archipelago, right? There's a whole bunch of islands that speak different languages, not just Spanish. Does that speaking another language make these Caribbean people not be Caribbean? No,
No,
it
of course
makes them
not.
Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
So I believe that it's up to us teachers to represent English in a different fashion, portray English as it is, a connection to other countries, a connection across cultures. Because again, how does one country that does not speak the same native language as the other country that it's communicating with speak, right? Which language do they speak? They speak English, because English, whether you like it or not, it is the global language, right?
Mm.
So that's the importance, and why we need to break that cycle. English has to be there for everybody.
I also think that goes with people should also strive to learn more languages. It's not just like Spanish or English. There's no reason to hate one
Hmm.
or prefer the other. We
Yes.
should strive to learn more. We are a mixed race here in the
Hmm.
Caribbean, and that comes with different cultures, ideologies,
Definitely.
languages, and we
Definitely. The
should
Caribbean as
we
a
should just
whole is
let
a
those
it's a
prejudices
Creole, right?
apart. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. We live in a Creole environment. So Creole means mixture. We
Exactly.
are mestizaje. We all of us are, right? And we should embrace that. I believe Crenshaw called it intersectionality, right?
Mhm.
We need to embrace that rhizomatic approach. Like, what was the name of that tree? Oh my God, that has like a bunch of roots interconnected, and the air smells really bad. You know what I'm talking about? Mangrove,
Oh,
a mangrove.
mango. Yes, it's from here.
So
So, but
it's
yes,
it's
it's
a
like
mangrove here.
interconnected.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
roots, and the same
yeah.
goes for us. The roots run deep, and it's everywhere. We're all connected
Yes,
here. It's a very
yes,
special thing that we have, and we shouldn't shame
exactly.
anybody for that.
And even if it stinks to some people, it's still beautiful, right?
Hmm. And serves its
It
purpose.
is still
I'm
beautiful.
loving the
Yes,
metaphors today.
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, here's the next one. What specific challenges do Puerto Rican educators face in promoting reading and English language learning, considering the decline in literature consumption?
I would have to go back to what I said about immediacy, right?
Hmm.
Again, if you wanted to watch a show back in my era, right, the olden days again, um, you had to be at a certain hour, a specific day, and a specific channel to be able to watch a show, right? I remember, what was the name of that show? El show de Chevy. Maybe you guys don't know what that is. Oh my God, I'm feeling old.
Rings a
But
bell.
you would watch three different cartoons. Two of them I remember. It was Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z, right?
Yeah.
And that happened always, every day from Monday through Friday at 3:30 p.m. So I would go out of school and I would run to my house, right? And everybody would be like immersed in the TV so they would be able to watch the show and wouldn't miss it. Because if you missed that day's show, guess what happened? You missed it.
Yeah.
And again, that culture of immediacy that we have today, you pay a subscription, you pay a streaming service, right? And you can watch the show whenever, at whatever time, at whatever day, you can just watch it at the comfort of your house.
It's so easily
Um,
accessible.
yes, and that creates, sadly, it creates a culture of immediacy, of on-demand culture, like I call it. Um, and when you give a book that is 300 pages long to a person that is accustomed to doing things in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 30 minutes, you're just going to be, no. I prefer to get the F, right? I prefer to get a zero in this assignment or this exam, this book project that we're working in class, because I don't believe myself capable. They are capable, but it's just like math. You have to create these um, neurological pathways. The more you do something, the better that neurological pathway functions, right? So the same thing happens with reading, and I think that's the biggest threat. Let's call it a threat to educators right now. Not even in English; it happens in Spanish as well.
Mhm.
Because some people might say, "Oh no, it's the divide in the language." Yes, that's a factor, but Spanish speakers are having the same issue. It's
Mhm.
again the culture of immediacy gets in the way of spending hours reading, right? Some people read fast, some people read slow. I myself, believe it or not, I'm a literature major in my master's and my doctor's now, and I still read slow. Not as slow as I used to be, right? But I still consider myself a slow reader. But how do I overcome that? I read and read and read, and every day that I read more, I become a better reader. I become a faster reader, and I just I can sit down for hours now. My back doesn't hurt anymore, and I enjoy what I'm doing because I built up the habit. Again, the gym, analogy. I created the muscle so that I can weight lift more today, and that's the threat that teachers have. The culture of immediacy, I would say.
Perhaps a way to promote, take that into advantage, the immediacy, is to promote the students to set goals of a certain amount of pages to read,
Mm-hmm.
and having done that, they get that dopamine from having finished a task, so that feeds into the immediacy.
Yes.
Maybe that would help them
Oh, definitely. Like right
finish the
now,
goal, the book.
I kind of have a reward system in place in my classroom. Like I divide the amount of chapters that you have to read per week, right? Let's say 3 chapters a week or 4 chapters a week. By the end of the week, we play a game through an application that I mentioned in the previous episode that it's called Classcraft, right? And in Classcraft, you can become an avatar of whichever culture. You can become a warrior. You create your own character, right? And at the end of the day, they have to fight a boss fight, right? A boss battle. So there's this character that shows up in the screen, and I place the application on the TV that I have in my classroom, and they can see the monster in front of them. But how do you defeat the monster? Well, you have to answer questions from the book correctly. So that creates like an award system for them.
Mhm.
And if they win, they get experience points and they raise up their levels, right? So what can you do with these levels? You have different powers depending on mage or healer or warrior in the class. And so every character has its own magical abilities. Like if let's say you spoke out of turn in the class or you did something wrong, you lose life points, and you don't want to get your life points to zero.
Exactly.
If your
Exactly.
life points get to zero, your character dies. And
Yeah.
if your character dies, then you have to complete an extra task for the class, which is always
Fair
fun. It's
enough.
always a fun task. But the students are afraid of what that task is, because almost
Oh,
never a student dies in the class, right? And yeah, like they can have powers to avoid dying in the game. Like a guardian will guard, right? The classmate, because they work in pairs, they work in groups, and I call them the tribes. And every
oh,
tribe has a different battle cry. I have this one team called the chupacabras or something like that, and and every time they win doing something, they say chupa chupa. Like that would be their battle cry. They come up with the weirdest
Mhm.
battle cries. I don't know why. So another power could be like the power of forage, where you can eat in class without asking for my permission, or
Oh,
eavesdrop. Eavesdrop lets you listen to music while you're doing the day's task or the day's
wow.
assignment. So
Yeah.
class script is amazing, and I use it with the books that we're reading and so on. So that's the reward system I have in place. And like you said, I divide the amount of pages or the amount of chapters that they have to read per week. So that works very, very well.
That sounds amazing. I had never heard of anything like that. So creative. And honestly, if I was a student, I would have loved it. It feeds into the dopamine and reward system I wish that I had gotten and would have motivated
Yeah,
me into reading a lot more than I had definitely had. Thank you so much for that tip.
definitely.
Okay, we have a
Sure.
comment. Someone here is asking, what type of book, novel, or story would you recommend future English teachers to discuss in class and get positive feedback and reaction from the students?
Well, depends on the grade level. Um, But the basic answer for everybody would be teach a book that you love, right? Teach a book that you're passionate about. Because if you don't love the book and you're bored about the book, that will translate into your students as well, right?
Mm,
If a book bores you to death, do not teach it,
of
even if
course.
it's in the curriculum.
Okay.
Go back to it later on, maybe try to find some enlightenment about why
Mhm.
you don't like the book. But if you find a book boring, it will translate into your students, right? A habit that I used to have was, and this happened with Beowulf, and I stopped doing that because I noticed that once I set the tone for the book, the students will follow with with the tone.
Mhm.
I would begin expressing how Beowulf is a very complex book, and I'm not gonna lie, it's very difficult to understand. And then later on, what would happen with the students? The students would be afraid of the book, right?
Mhm.
And that happened to me, and I said, and I'm teaching it again this year, and I changed the tactics with the book. So what I did was that I started reading the book with the students in class, right? And I started explaining lines, and I asked them questions about, how can we get around the meaning of this verse or this stanza? And they would lose the fear because I created the fear with the previous generation.
Mhm.
And students talk in the hallways. So the students would tell
Yes.
the next generation, hey, this year in 11th grade, this is going to happen. You're going to do an MLA research paper. You're going to read Beowulf. Beowulf is very difficult. And they would automatically absorb that information. So that was a mistake I made. But yeah, teach a book that you love. Teach a book that you're passionate about. Like, for example, I'm passionate about Brandon Sanderson's The Arithmetist. I love basically every book that Brandon Sanderson has written. And if I love the book, I'm pretty sure that I'll be able to transmit that passion into my students. So, Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson is my recommendation. But again, it depends on what you like, it depends on what you're passionate about. Teach a book that you're passionate about.
That's very reasonable and super helpful. So, to all future teachers here, choose a book that you like that will transfer off to your students. All
Yeah.
right. If you could choose the books used to teach ESL, what books will you use and why? This is very similar to the question asked, but is there anything else that you could add to it? Maybe like a
Um,
little list. Top three. Top three.
that are in the curriculum or that are not?
Not
Like
in the
that I would
curriculum.
love to teach. Okay.
Hypothetically speaking, if you could somehow alter it, you had that power, what would you choose?
Well, will I get in trouble if I say that I already teach one that is not in the curriculum?
I don't think
um,
so.
or maybe a couple. Well, there's three books. One of them I teach already. It's I think it's actually banned in Texas and some states of the United States. Last I checked, it's not in the curriculum of the English program of Puerto Rico, and it's Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. That book was written in the 1950s, I believe in 1953, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and it's so prophetic. And when I say prophetic, I literally mean that it depicts how society is today. And it actually has to do with what we're talking about, the consumption of literature, right? Books in that world, it's a dystopian world, right? It's a science fiction dystopian world. And in Fahrenheit 451, books are illegal, right? And the government has banned books, and show up with whoever shows up with books, they will go to jail. They will be arrested, right? And possibly even burned, right? They burn books. Firemen are the policemen of this world, right? But they do
Oh.
not put out fires.
They
They
they start
burn
the fire.
books. Yes, they burn books and they burn people. And I know it sounds dramatic, but it's kind of prophetic because knowledge, literature is controlled.
Mhm.
And if you look at our our situation right now and the situation of the 1950s, it has its differences, yes. Hence why I teach it from a nowadays perspective. Back then, in the 1940s, we had the World War II, right?
Mhm.
And what was happening with books? They were being burned, right? Because this regime that was going up in the scale of the governmental society wanted to control knowledge. They wanted to have only one source of knowledge, and that was the government. So, hence, Fahrenheit 451 came out of that culture. But then again, in today's society, books are not illegal that I know of, right? But we make knowledge and we make reading illegal for us. We ban
Mhm.
ourselves from reading. And we are not seeing it, right, through the scope of Fahrenheit 451 in the sense that, the government is burning books, but we burn the possibility of actually being able to read books. Another book that I would love to teach is Crystal Rain by Tobias S. Buckell. It's another science fiction book, but here the main characters are Caribbean and they travel space trying to find another setting, another planet where the entire Caribbean peoples can live, right? And you see a merging of all the cultures of the Caribbean
Mhm.
in one nation. And that's a concept that I would love to teach. I haven't taught the book. Maybe I'll teach it next year, who knows? But but let's keep it quiet, right? Um, and yes, like teaching that concept of unity of all the Caribbean cultures, I would definitely love to teach that book because of that. And the last book that I'm always cringy about whether I teach it or not, I haven't taught yet. It's a very historical book, very controversial, and it's War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson A. Dennis. that book, it's way, way, way controversial, right? It teaches, or it depicts, I would like to say, the untold history of Puerto Rico, the history that the history teacher, the history classroom does not teach, the touchy subjects that nobody wants to talk about, right? And why I'm like skeptical about teaching it, maybe I can get around that and get approval from the parents, or maybe edit the book before presenting it to the students, is because there's a lot of graphic material, like death. It's very macabre in the book because it talks about La Masacre de Ponce,
Mhm.
and it shows you pictures that came out in the newspapers. It shows you pictures of the bodies of the people. It gives you the raw, hardcore experience of history that nobody wants to talk about. The history that is shameful to talk about, right? And again, I would love to teach that book because of the historical content, and maybe I could connect it with a history class and talk with Professor Marinelli Berrios, who's our history teacher, and basically put together a unit so that we could go across this book. But again, I would have to like redact some passages, right, with black ink maybe, or eliminate pictures, because it's really hardcore. The book gives you everything, like laid bare, no sugarcoating. It talks about the reality that Puerto Rico went through back in the day. So yeah, those are the books that I would teach, and why. And I kind of cheat because Fahrenheit 451, I'm already teaching it, and I suggest that everybody at least gives it a look. It's an old book, I know, but it's amazing. It makes you think. What would you do if you have to hide a book because it's illegal? What would you have to do if tomorrow somebody came to you and told you where to work, told you where to go, what food to eat, right? Um, and the ability of choosing was taken away from you, and ignorance was mandated by the government. What would you do in that sense, right? That's why I love Fahrenheit 451. And these other books, again, are amazing. I highly encourage everybody to read them.
That first one sounds wonderful. I will definitely give it a read. I love dystopian fantasy and historical fantasy. You didn't say that the last one was historical fantasy, it's just historical. Sounds
Yes.
very interesting either way. But yeah, I can. I have seen that now some teenagers are starting to pick up reading more. Fantasy driven. Dystopian is kind of coming back, like this
Hmm.
young adult novels and stuff like that is
Yeah.
starting to come back, which gives me hope because if, like you said, we create those habits of reading, or they created themselves, which is great that they have that initiative, they will go
Hmm.
on to read more complicated or classical literature that is required.
Yeah. And if they love reading, something amazing that has happened to me as a teacher is that you know that they love reading now because they are suggesting books to you, right?
Mm.
I have the student from ninth grade. She went to me and she said, "Teacher, I know that maybe you don't like reading in Spanish. Maybe you can find the book in English. But this is the title. Would you give it a try?" And I have it in my wish list because of her, right? That's when you know, like, I got to them.
Yeah,
Yes. And they did not like to read beforehand. So that makes my day.
that is a plus.
I'm definitely adding Fahrenheit 459 to my wish list now.
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely do it. It's an old book, but if you compare it with today, you'll see that it predicts, like, it even talks about plasma TV, flat screens were not a thing in the 19,
Those weren't
whatchamacallit,
an idea.
19,
Those weren't an idea.
50s.
They weren't even an idea.
Uh-huh. And it showed up there, like in the book, people were obsessed with technology. People wanted to spend all day in front of a TV. Even there's some seashells that the characters use, and they are radios because radios were a thing back then. Not earbuds, but you're like, doesn't this look like a seashell kind of? And you see the book very prophetic. It predicts many things that are happening right now.
All right. Thank you so much for that part. Now I'm going to leave off the last questions to Nicole. She has a couple of things to
Yeah,
say on that.
this is going to be our last question of the night. And it is, how does access to diverse English literature that isn't just American or British affect their English language acquisition?
Well, you have the word internet, right? You can say internet, or internet, right? There's three different pronunciations, right, for the same word. And maybe there's more, I don't know. But if you have a diversity of books, right, different genres, different authors, um, different cultures represented therein, you become enculturated, right? You are presented with vicarious experiences. So if you have a diversity of books or a diversity of English literature, you would see different variations of the language. And that gives you a better chance of understanding other people, not just the classic, let's go with the US literature, right? Or the Americanized version of English. You would be able to understand other cultures as well and maybe make some connections. And that will enhance your ability to acquire language. Like, for example, the first time I read um, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, right? When I was reading Sherlock Holmes for the first time, I saw the word color with an OU, and I was like,
Yeah,
"What's
color.
this?"
It's color, but it's
Ah,
really like color.
it's exactly. And oh my God, if Sally Delgado hears this, but yeah, different variations of the language will enhance your diversity as you approach your fluency with the language. And for example, I say the word we a lot instead of saying little. And I acquired that as I was reading Irish books, right? English Irish books, right? And instead of saying a little bit more, I would say a wee bit more. And how did I acquire that? It was through reading diverse literature. So that's the way that having a diversity of English literature included in your plethora or your repertoire of reading, right, enhances your vocabulary and your second language as acquisition.
And we could see that in Spanish too, like depending on
Oh,
what literature comes from where.
yeah, and kids nowadays, like my daughter, I was taking her to the park the other day, and she said, "Papá, mira la cometa." I was like, "Eh? A cometa? What you mean cometa?" She said, "Yeah, yeah, mira, papá, la cometa." I'm like, "Oh, you mean chiringa, right?" So the exposure to television, to books that are not from Puerto Rico only or from the States only enhances that comprehension of other cultures and provides vicarious experiences and acquisition of language through different mediums, right? Not only just one center scope, one periscope, if you may, like looking through the lens of one glass only. You have different varieties as well.
All right. Well, that was all very interesting. And now that we've reached the end of our episode, I would like to thank you, Joseph, for taking your time and
Sure.
like answering questions with us. Um, and this opportunity to like speak to you directly and be live. I would also like to thank the professor Glady for allowing us to do this. And teaching English as a second language can be very challenging. And certainly there are many stones left unturned during today's interview, despite scratching the surface of this extensive topic. Uh, I hope that everyone watching learned just as much as I did today, and like the book recommendations, they're all going on my wish list for sure. Um, yeah, and I hope everyone's just had a good night and everyone got to learn something and took something away from this experience. Now, thank you to everyone who decided to stop by. And before we have a sneak peek to our next episode titled Condiciones de los planteles escolares y la clausura de escuelas en Puerto Rico, where students will be joined by Rafael Roman, the former Secretary of Education. And I just want to wish everyone like a good night. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.